Hello, students. Welcome to lecture number 4 in our International Business Certification NASBET related class. Let me go ahead and share and show you what we are working with today. Here we go. Today we're going to be talking about first technology. Well, I don't think that I really have to tell you much because frankly, most students are further in their knowledge of technology than are the professors. There are some specific websites, however, that are helpful for you. When you might recall that when you do imports and exports from the US, you have to associate your product or service with a specific schedule for various reasons, including customs/tariffs. Here is a website that helps you find that. Some customers and insurance and et cetera will call the North American Industry Classification System numbers. I've had to use this in a bunch of different contexts, including tax and customers to see what they wanted. Here's a website for that. In week 2, we talked about the export control classification number. That is when you need to put a number associated with your product or designate a number with your product in order to determine whether it needs export licensing or not. You can look at this website. And finally, you see if indeed you do need to file for an export. Here's the website for that. This is so self-evident, I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but there are indeed software tools to take care of all these issues. And I won't talk about a specific brand or whatnot. Some work better than me. All right, let's get out of that and jump into marketing. Okay. And it's interesting because they do, in this context, they do a little more analysis of the company than the customer per se. So we'll talk about the customer a little later on. So let's just jump in. So basically, first they want us to talk about internal and external environment. Of course, that means internal resources. Is your company ready to export? External environment. We'll cover that. Obviously, everything from the economic environment to the legal regulatory environment in the country into which you go, the competitive environment from your competitors, etc., trade agreements, etc. Now, internally, the first question you always ask, if, for example, your boss comes to you, excuse me, and says, hey, I want to start exporting. A, you choose a company, but B, what's it going to take us to get ready? And even if I don't ask for what it takes to get ready, I think you should review this number one company commitment. And basically, this is an overview of the type of things that you should begin to be prepared to say, okay, this is a good idea. We really need this internally. We need to be prepared in this way. What resources do we need inside? It basically tells you whether you're ready or not. The next is, what does senior management really want to do? Do they looking for a 10% increase? And you might describe to them that it's going to cost you more to do sales in international markets. And if you're a really tight market with small margins, international sales might not work for you, for example, because you won't have the margin to be able to do that. Now, um, I think a good practice tip is that it's usually easier when you're first getting into the international market to get into a market that is somewhat similar to your own, whether it be the economic scale, languages, culture, etc., and then eventually go out. For example, a lot of people will uh, go to Singapore in Asia Pacific region. A lot of international trade. That's where they're ready to do. So basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is not only is it easier to go somewhere that's culturally similar, but perhaps more important, don't say, I'm going to go into 50 new markets tomorrow, countries. I might start with a few, see how it goes, and then slowly advance after you have experience in those markets. Number three, what type of capability or experience do you have with the employees? Does your accounting department are they competent to export shipping documents documents to find export licenses? Does accounting finance know letters of credit, etc.? So if not, it may take a bit of education for them to get up to speed. Next, technical production capabilities. Can your company, let's say I'm selling into Europe, I'm going to have what's known as the CE mark. We'll get into that a bit later, but is your plant ready to get that certification to be able to sell into Europe? Here's some of the marks. In North America, we see a lot of companies following ISO, as the International Standards Organization. 9001 just happens to be a self-certifying system of quality. In order to go to EU, you're going to need CE marking. That it's a acronym of a French term, but basically conformity with health, safety, environmental protection, or EU Declaration of Conformity. Brazil, here's a couple. These are just a couple other examples. Brazil, it's going to be in Metro. You have to certify that it's good for use in Brazil. Japan, JIS. In other words, on the technical side, you need to get your engineering people up to speed and manufacturing people up to speed to be able to be ready to get certified so the products are certified, approved to enter the new market. All right. Now, we're talking about this for the third time, but basically, as you were doing your research into going into different countries, um, what are the resources I have to do research? And this is going to make you look good to the CEO. I just love the country commercial guides because Department of Commerce puts that out and basically gives you a lot of information on doing business in everything from taxation to import laws to etc. Great resource. If you want to start looking at the demographics, how advanced is the economy as far as spending, discretionary income that consumers have, safety, etc. The CIA World Factbook is a great site. Also, I've given you a link to the World Bank's development indicators to show how, I hate to use the word advanced because it sounds just denigrating, but it really shows where the economy is in development. Also, I'll just let you see here's some of the other links that you can see. Some are, I believe, two of the three of these are pay, while the first is free. There are also various trade organizations that we've talked about before that are also willing to give you information as to the country and region into which you wish to export. Now, public and private sources of data or research online. We just talked about this. U.S. trade, that is how to export, census, commodity statistics, CIA World Factbook. Those are all free researches. World Development Bank indicators. There is the website to which I was referring. Um, Geneva, great place for tracking international trade statistics, this organization. Uh, Export assistance centers. They're basically your local Department of Commerce that assists you in increasing your exports for and export readiness and actually conducting trade. All right, here are some private resources for which you can pay. Some of these are very good. And let's say that I don't get enough from public resources. Some of these I can actually use to find out very good data that hints at what my competitors are doing in various countries. Bill of lading data. I mean, it shows who's selling where and what. So that's really good information. Trade agreements, we've talked about that. Product certification. Let's go back to product certification. We talked about before countries require certification to sell into their country or region, like the EU, have to do with self health, safety, and or technical standards. Let's change that right now. And the certification, the way it really goes is that the governments authorize certain private companies, SGS, BVAC, Intertech, ISO, etc., to be certifying bodies. They have the expertise. Then the company will do this. They have this standard and they have remedial actions if there's something wrong. They have good engineering standards, I mean, et cetera, et cetera. And then they will invite the certifying body, a private company, into their plant to verify that they have indeed met these standards, and then they receive this certification. Some are manufacturing, some are product specific. So you may actually have to get a certification per product line. Here it is, Conformité Européenne Mark. Sorry, my French is horrible. That's what CE stands for. And that is the certifying body that ensures that your product is consistent with EU law or law there from the European Union body is called the EU directives. ISO is accepted in many, many countries, the US as well. International Organization for Standardization. Anyone who's an engineer in your company will be very familiar with this. 9001, 9000 are a couple of certifications with which you should be roughly familiar. I just wanted you to see the also within the country commercials guide, they have customs regulation standards as well at this website. Now, let's switch over. We've talked about resources, research, also certifications, what you have to do to go in. Now we get to the soft side, if you will, of entering another market. And this has to do with cultural issues. We touched on this briefly, and some of it is self-evident, but it is always prudent to study the do's and don'ts, the taboos, the likes and dislikes of the country or region into which you wish to enter. That's often influenced by country's language, religion, and negotiating methods and styles. Okay. So, language, it's always nice to have your website, for example, in different languages. I wouldn't do it into, you know, 50 different languages, but if you're going into France, for example, not only should you have it translated to French, but it may be legally required. So if you use the major languages, that's a good idea. Um, you see this Spanish, French, Chinese, English, German and Japanese. Those are some of the major language to which many large companies will translate their local quote unquote or locally accessible websites and installation instructions, marketing brochures, etc. for and brochures by them mean their website for local companies. Cultural issues. Let's see. I've got some examples. Make sure you have someone that really knows the language and the culture. Just take a read through your website. You'll see I think, some humorous examples of poor marketing. Clairol uh, did a product which was slang for manure. Coors beer slogan, when translated, it was a colloquial term for having diarrhea in Spanish. In Ethiopia, where the literacy rate was lower, fewer people read than maybe in the EU. Often pictures of the food are on the label. And so you can imagine the uh, distaste, if you will, when consumers for the first time saw picture of a baby on baby food. It was rather confusing and all right, cultural issues, of course. Uh, we in the U.S. see things through a Judeo-Christian lens, and no matter where you're raised, you're going to see the world through your lenses, if you will, your glasses at the world. But I mean, just like again, look into the specific country and some of the cultural taboos. Food drink prohibitions are a big one. You know, everything from pork, alcohol, etc. Just be sensitive. Marketing taboos. Sometimes you want to be careful with images, offensive images. Um, Yellow is happiness and warmth in most of North America, but in Latin America, this is a generalization. It can represent death, sorrow, and mourning. Red might represent happiness, joy, and celebration in China, for example, but in Middle Eastern countries, it means danger and evil. Not every time, but that's sort of the subconscious connotation. Okay. Here are websites that you can use: 31 countries here, country guides, keys to success. So, again, these are good links for you to use as you're going into a new country. Another issue is to see the infrastructure. For example, if I'm going to distribute food into a new country, new international country, I must be very, very diligent in determining how good their infrastructure is. What if I have a perishable good, a perishable food that I'm selling into that country, and yet transportation system might take 2 weeks, where I might, in the US, for example, I might expect it to get there in 48 hours. That's something to consider. Um, in somewhere that has healthcare systems that are different from the US, one might not expect that you could get as great a saturation of your medical technologies you might in the EU. Okay. Again, CIA World Factbook gives you good information on the development, infrastructure, etc. Here we go, a review. Once you're jumping in and looking internally, we've been looking externally uh, at almost everything except when we said make sure your company's ready. So how do you determine if your company's ready? Various things. Obviously, the SWOT analysis: strength, weakness, opportunities, threats. You guys should have probably done this in 3, 4 different classes by now, but basically, I'm looking at my own company in comparison to others. I have a lot of money. I have good intellectual property, strong financial position, etc. What are my weaknesses? My brand's not strong. What are my threats? I might lose talent to others. So you should really do a critical self-analysis of your own company when you go into a new country and determine how do we position ourselves with a realistic understanding of this self-analysis. Very important. Again, strength. What existing strengths do you have? What leverages? Weaknesses, be very honest. What could we do better? What do we need to do better to succeed in this new company? Opportunities. This is great. Uh, where in looking at our strengths and what our leverage, where could that be best used in the world? What countries might most easily adapt our strengths? And of course, T is threats, and that list has to be everything from competition, other barriers to entry. For example, if I am decided tomorrow I'm going to start selling cars, well, the barrier to entry is I've got to come up with $2 billion to build a car manufacturing plant and design and et cetera, et cetera. And so that's quite a barrier. If I'm selling purses into a country, then I might be able to, build them for, a few dollars a piece. That is a much lower barrier of entry. Competitor activity research. Um, Again, we've shown these various trades, and the key is find out what your competitors are doing in that company. Let's see. Here's some more. Peers is a good one, and that talks about import and export data, bill of lading level, because it shows actually who is importing and who is exporting. Data mine is another good one. Euromonitor, of course, is a good basis largely for the EU. And finally, Compass Link, which is very good. It's 21 million business profiles. Let's say, for example, you wanted to research a new distributor in a country. This is a good way to look into them. Okay, so we have talked about going into new country, doing research, seeing if you are indeed ready and what additional resources you need to be ready to go into that country. All right. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.